Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us, whether you are joining us live or watching the recording. I'm Jordan Roberts, and I will be hosting here. And I'm joined by both Eric and Matt, who I will let introduce themselves in just a moment. But let's get some housekeeping things out of the way. If you're watching live and you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments. And if you're thinking to yourself that this is a dumb question, or you're joining a little later and you don't know whether that question has already been asked, go ahead and drop it in the comments and we'll get to it. You don't have a stupid question. Someone else has probably already thought of it. And so with that out of the way, I'll go ahead and let our panelists introduce themselves here. We'll start with you, Matt, and then we'll go with you, Eric, and then you, Rob.
Hi, everyone. Matt McKinney, McKinney Wealth Management. Been in wealth management for about 15 years, and I'm also a certified exit planning advisor and excited to be here and contribute to the conversation.
Awesome. Happy to have you, Matt. Eric, we'll go to you.
Hey, Jordan. Interesting to be on this side of the conversation. I'm, of course, used to being in Jordan's role, and I promised her that I would make her job extremely difficult to facilitate this conversation. So that is my role for the day. But in all seriousness, Eric Schultz, Journey Alliance, and we focus on business coaching with a hint of consulting in the mix today.
And we'll go to you, Rob.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rob Walton. I'm a practicing attorney in Tampa Bay, Florida. In my 14th year practicing law, and I help business owners with estate law and business matters.
Great. Thank you, Rob. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump straight into our questions. And Rob, since I already have you up on screen, I'll start with you. We'll start with a general question here of what advice would you give to business owners that are considering entering a partnership?
Well, I think I would say that with everything, start small, work your way big. That it's very important that you know the people that you're doing business with. And maybe the very most important information on any business contract are the names up at the top. That, it tells you a lot about how that opportunity is going to go.
Gotcha. And when you're saying, start small, work big, can you elaborate a little bit more on that? What do you mean by that?
Well, I'll give the example in the practice of law that, of course, there's the opportunity to have partnerships. Attorneys partner up all the time. But, even attorneys don't always agree. And sometimes firms break up, and believe that, having a trial run can be a great way to see if it's a good fit. So you can, start small, work your way big. You can associate another attorney on a case, for example. So if you're handling a legal matter, you're handling a case, rather than just teaming up with somebody altogether and making them your partner in all that you do, it is an option to associate them, have a this case only that you're working on and see how it goes. And that there similarly are opportunities for joint ventures, that can be, that venture only. That it's not always best to just, team up without having done work with somebody before.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's really good advice. And because I have some inside knowledge on what I think Eric is going to say, I'm going to pose this question to you next because Rob has mentioned that test project or test situation. So what advice would you give to business owners considering entering a partnership?
Yeah, it's kind of the try before you buy situation for me, whether that be individuals that have worked together. It could even be employer-employee relationship, and maybe that employee has an opportunity to partner up. Chances are that experience you've had in the employee side relationship is going to give you indication at some level what some of that partnership might look like. The other aspect, try before you buy, is maybe there are some small projects or things that can be worked together before partnering up related to business that you're considering or unrelated to it. Maybe there's some other type of project that could be worked. That is, while I'll kind of speak mostly the conversation today to maybe experience with existing clients or client relationships. I'm in a business partnership with Mark. And I've been in previous business partnerships as well. And Mark and I even had worked on multiple projects together before we actually partnered up as well. So I think that's significant. It's a smart approach to risk when given the opportunity.
Definitely. So definitely a key takeaway here from these first two answers is absolutely find a way to get to really know the person that you're partnering with.
Yeah, and just if I could say, jump in off what Eric shared, having like a shared vision, asking those powerful questions of like, well, what does that partnership look like to you? Or where do you see this business in 1 year or in 3 years or in 5 years? And if there's not alignment in that vision, they're, way off. That's something you really have to ask those questions early on before you go far into those projects.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great addition, Rob. So Matt, I'm going to pose this question to you as well. What advice would you give business owners who are considering entering a partnership?
Yeah, I think they both spoke about the opportunity to kind of try it out, and maybe you don't. Maybe you have to step into this thing with 2 feet. So how do you try to prepare yourself ahead of time? I think it's really important to understand how your business partner is going to treat people that they care about, right? So how do they treat their wife or spouse? How do they treat their kids? How do they treat their employees? How do they greet people or talk to people at the restaurant? I mean, you have to remember that we plan for perfection, but life is definitely not perfect. And if you're going to be in the foxhole with somebody, you're going to want to know when bombs are going off that they're not going to be throwing you out or putting you on top of them. And sometimes, and very oftentimes, I'm sure we all can have seen this, is that there's plenty of those situations. And why people got together is typically because their strengths are different than one another. So they may think differently, but at the core of who they are, you need to be swimming in the same direction. Your values need to be steadfast, right? And very oftentimes people go because they see a lot of talent and they go, wow, this person can really, really drive this portion of the business. But they forget about all the challenges personally that they don't know about, that they haven't uncovered. And so the reality of what that partnership they want it to look like isn't what it ends up being, because they didn't do the heavy lifting on the personal side. And so I think it's just like dating to a certain degree, of spending enough time with these people, both in social situations and in business situations, to just be able to see, hey, how do these people operate? Right? Because we love the skill set, but the outcome may not be what we want. So I see that happening very often. And I think it's just, we're impatient. So you want to start a business, you're after it, right? You're ready to go, and you're seeing we need to take action. We need to be patient enough to really know that this isn't something like I'm going to be in for a week. Like, think about it as a marriage. So that'd be my
if I could just jump in again, thank you for allowing me to do that. So I think about, how do you get to know somebody that outside of just, working a particular deal with them, that, if actually they were a team member before they became a partner, that sticking with the law firm example, that, before you're a partner, oftentimes, you're an associate for 6, 7, sometimes 9 years, before you're given the opportunity to become a partner. And that is the vetting. You get to see how someone operates. You get to see their work product. You get to know their values and how they treat other people that are also on the team. And that can be a great source of finding a partner. Somebody you've already worked with, that you've already vetted them, that they are rock solid, and you're making them a partner because you want that a rising tide floats all ships.
Yeah.
So you bring
Yeah, I
them
think
all.
yeah, that's a great ad, Rob. I really like, Matt, how you described it as kind of a dating relationship. I think that's a really good way to describe and how you should vet this person that you're partnering with, because it's a long-term relationship and you need to consider that fact. So that I just wanted to comment on that. I thought that was a really good thing. So I'm going to pose this next question to you, Matt. And what would you say the most important factor business partners should consider when they're structuring their partnership is?
I would say setting really clear expectations of one another. I think when you're getting into a partnership, the first thing is you need to be swimming again in the same direction. Make sure that you understand where each other's coming from an expectation. What do you expect of me? What do I expect of you? And then I like to call these things pre-decisions. How many pre-decisions can we make? So if we have a problem, how do we handle that problem? If we have this issue that comes up, let's kind of play some of those out before the issues happen. So when the issue does happen, we already have some of these solutions already at our hip. We've already agreed to how we're going to operate, right? It's very difficult to make a decision in the middle of the storm. It's very easy to make it when you two aren't under the pressure of the storm itself. So just trying to address those issues in the front end, set real clear expectations of one another. And that's both financial and operational, right? Maybe defining roles could be helpful. And then I love, and this is probably, Rob probably will love this comment, but the idea of getting everything in writing to a certain degree is really good because very often we talked about that. Right. Well, we talked about that. Rob's getting excited. He can't contain himself over there. We talked about that. But if we had clear communication, then we all know, hey, this is what happened. We all agree. This is like where we set. So no one can go back on. And I think that that's really helpful for people and to play out these future-based scenarios so they don't get, so people don't get wrapped around the axle versus he said, she said type thing.
Yeah, I think that's really solid advice there. I did want to expand a little on the idea of pre-decisions. There are some situations that we can probably come up with on our own, that aren't hard to think of. But for those things that you wouldn't expect or that you might not off the top of your head think of, how can business partners come up with these pre-decisions, and what kinds of things should they be considering for that?
Well, there's some really easy layup ones that, are, death, disability, dissolution of service, withdrawal, not active in the business, just withdrawing and then felony. So those are kind of these basic like triggering metrics that typically, you're going to establish in your agreements in some way, shape, or form. But I think that's why it folds back to the value stuff, because, I've been in business and I'm, with employees or with partners and, hey, one had a cancer diagnosis, another one has a baby coming. Like, how do you handle all these things to a certain degree where you're going to need some autonomy and flexibility? Somebody has a death in the family, all these things are going to happen. And the question is that person going to care enough about you to want to support you through the challenges that you're going to have in life? Because we're all going to have challenges in life. And so it can be aligned value-wise. That's how you're really going to make it through the tough times, because no one's been in business been like, oh, it was easy the whole time. All we did was make money. Everything just came in. I never had a problem, right? Never had a personal issue. Like that doesn't happen. So what does happen is, hey, my kid's very sick. I got to deal with this. My wife's sick. I'm going through a divorce. My family member, that all that happens. And so that's why the dating part on the front end is so important, because these other things are going to happen. And you need somebody who cares enough about you and your values align enough that they're willing to step in the gap for when you may fall short, because in certain seasons of life we may all fall short.
Yeah, I think that's such a fantastic point. So thank you for that. I'm going to pose this one next to you, Eric. So what is the most important factor that business partners should consider when structuring their partnership?
I've been jotting notes. Matt said a lot that was really good. The process of going through an operating agreement, and this is a really more of a Rob deeper conversation, but I can speak from the experience of going through it. I can speak from the experience of not having gone through it with previous environments as well, or not going through it well. I can speak from going through it after the fact in previous environments better as well. But that process, I would say, is absolutely critical, because a lot of what we're talking about, if it's done well, is going to branch off into a lot of the conversation points. So for me, having clear vision alignment doesn't mean everybody has to have it all figured out. But like was mentioned earlier, if one person wants to grow this billion-dollar organization and reach the world, and the other person really just wants to reach their community, there's a drastic difference. It's going to be a really big issue that you're not going to be able to get over. And that's just a very basic example. But then the operating agreement side of things, Matt gave a list of things that need to be hashed out. But if you can picture as a potential business partner, some of those conversations are really challenging. Like if both business partners have spouses or families or other deep considerations financially, to have to think about what happens when you're disabled, or what happens if you're if you die through the course of the business partnership, and how that is then handled with your family, those can create dialogues that can create tension and conflict and friction, both internally and then with each other. And I actually think that's healthy, because it's better to navigate those frictions up front and also learn how each other are going to navigate those conversations when they're not real, because that's going to make the business partnership stronger as you go through it. And if you can't get through having the real deep conversations for an operating agreement, then you had no business being in business together in the first place. So I think that's a clear component. I'd say the operating agreement. The other thing, though, so I'm going to give an A and a B. Sorry, not sorry. Role clarity, given the work that we do, absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. So critical. I mean, we have a component to our service that benchmarks roles, and we believe in it so much that we've literally paid the company that we're certified through to come in and benchmark our roles, my role and Mark's role. It's not because we couldn't have done that ourselves. We just wanted somebody that was completely detached from us going through the process, and we were willing to pay a nice fee in order to do so, to make sure that we had absolute role clarity for ourselves as business partners and what we were stepping into, and we can continue to point back to it to make sure that we're providing the value to each other and to the business that we committed to in the first place.
Yeah, and it sounds like that role clarity really ties back to having some of the answers to who will handle what, or how you handle, what X, Y, and Z when it happens. So I think that's a really great addition as well. Rob, I'm going to go to you, because we have mentioned you having input here on so many different areas. So for you, what would you say the most important factor for business partners is when structuring their partnership?
Well, getting it in writing, number one. Getting it in writing, and just to build off of what both Matt and Eric have shared, making sure that there's a very clear path for all the key players, the partners, that they know how decisions are made, and that there's a path for good decisions to be made. And I think back to some conversations, with colleagues, not clients, and not disclosing any client confidence, with colleagues that have left firms and gone on to other firms. What are the reasons? And some of the reasons are because when good ideas are presented, they get put to a committee to die. The firm doesn't have a culture that embraces change or embraces new technology or new way of doing things. And you don't want to lose, a star player that, is a partner, is contributing, they're on the team, but they're just their good ideas are not well received. They're not, there's not a place where that input is really, they don't see that it matters. So they make other arrangements, and that can really hurt a business, in a very big way. And if you look at some of the, the origin of some of the different firms in our area, some of it has to do with that, where, senior partners are not as receptive to, the ideas of the mid-level partners. And so they all get together and say, well, we'll leave and do it ourselves. The other consideration is, and it, going to some of the nitty gritty of, like, the operating agreement and different agreements to structure the business, structure the partnership. Do you have non-competes? What does that look like? Do you have any proprietary information, client lists, customer lists? How is that secured? Just doing all that planning on the front end so that it doesn't become an issue on the back end where, you're having to file a police report because somebody, ran off with data that doesn't belong to them. That when you have it in writing that, they knew that at the outset, everybody agreed to that, it can go a very long way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And it kind of leads into another question, actually. But first, I want to emphasize something that you said, because I think it is worth repeating, is you described there needs to be a path for good decisions to be made. That is such a great way to put that. If there's not a way for ideas to be heard or for people to feel heard, that's going to cause an issue. So jumping into the next question with you, you had mentioned the structuring of ownership. So I just wanted to see if maybe you had anything else to add here, Rob. What should business partners consider when deciding how to structure ownership and profit distribution?
They have a lot, maybe more than we could cover in this, in this time together. But looking at the tax implications, the number of partners, the type of business, how is this going to grow? All that is very, very important, and must be considered in great detail at the outset. What you don't want to do is, start out on the journey and then realize, actually, we should have done S Corp, we should have done C Corp, or, we didn't need an LLC, or no, we needed a PLLC. There's different types of entities that can be created, and then where they're being created. Is this a Florida business? Is this going to be, nationwide, or are we going to do business in certain states? Do we need to make sure that, there's a filing in each state in which you're doing business? Who's responsible for that? Which partner? Doing all of that planning on the front end is critical.
Yeah. What I'm hearing that maybe isn't being said is that you probably really need help with this kind of thing. Like, that's not something that you need to figure out on your own as business partners. Would you say that's probably accurate? I know we need a lawyer to get it in writing, but beyond that.
Yeah. So it's, it's like two sides to the coin. On the one hand, you don't want to kill the entrepreneurial spirit, all the good of what's happening in creating this business and getting it going. On the other hand, if you aren't careful about that and you make a mistake, it can really cost you. You start doing business in another state and you didn't tell that state that you were doing business in their state. There can be severe consequence for this, legal implications, tax implications. And those are the things that can really, it's like all of a sudden you're sprinting and then you just hit quicksand, or you're running in mud, and better to just, do that due diligence, planning on the front end, have an idea of what must happen, and then who will be responsible for making sure that it does happen. because it may, doesn't necessarily require that every one of the partners is having to, oversee that aspect of the business, but making sure that it is clearly defined, who is responsible for it, because there can be a liability issue that can present if it's not being done, and if there's not a check and balance system to make sure that it has been done. So actually conducting, annual or semi-annual meetings, keeping minutes, doing the work that actually makes it a business, and following that structure that's in place that, hopefully you've taken time to think through, like Eric said, going through the operating agreement ahead of time, and then just carrying out the plan that's already there, and making sure, like Matt shared, that, there's that shared vision, shared alignment and values.
Yeah, that's really good, and a really good segue into posing this question to Matt, actually. So, Matt, for you, what should business partners consider when deciding how to structure ownership and profit distribution?
Yeah, I mean, I can just think of an example of like the pro rata rule as it relates to S corps, where everybody, it's equivalent distribution, so everybody's got to be on the same page. Because if maybe, what if one wants to grow? To Eric's point earlier, you have this trajectory where one wants to grow, the other one says, "Hey, look, my kids need new shoes," or whatever it is. My kid's going to private school, and now you're having this challenge. So I think, Rob really touched on a lot of the different pieces, and there's a lot there that you could dig into for a really long time. But I think on the bigger scale of it is the people that you're working with. Sometimes people have multiple businesses. Maybe they have 10 or 6, or they're serial entrepreneur. Other times this is going to be their baby, maybe yours. So if you have somebody who's more of a passive equity owner versus, it depends on these partnerships and how they're set up. And someone who's an active person, well, the active person's like, "Hey, I need this to eat." And the other person's like, "Hey, I thought we were growing this thing." So, you might not have, the vision alignment necessary to make it all work. And you need to make sure you strip that stuff out in the front end. But I think Rob covered it pretty well, so not too much to add.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that, though, Matt. Eric, I'll pose this one to you next as well. What would you say that business partners should consider when deciding how to structure ownership and profit distribution?
Yep. Yeah, I'm thinking about it from a slightly, I'd say, reframe perspective. So I want to recognize our conversation so far has been a lot of what people are considering that may step into a business partnership. I'm also thinking about those that maybe have been in one. They're currently in one, maybe for the last 5 years, 10 years. And so they might be thinking, well, yeah, that would have been great, but I don't have a time capsule. I can't go back in time and start this over. So here I am, and I hear everything you're saying, and yeah, I'm living the effects of actually not doing the things that we're talking about, which I would say oftentimes in the world of starting a business and small businesses, especially the first run, if neither party has had experience doing it before and doesn't have the people around them, they probably do start out on the wrong foot, unfortunately. So I'm thinking from the down the road as well as the current perspective. I'm considering, of course, the small business world in this. And I think it has to do with what was already mentioned, which is expectation management. So when I'm thinking about structuring, I'm thinking about who owns what percent and how that's divided up, who gets what in terms of compensation. What does compensation look like in terms of salary, in terms of other benefits? And then I'm thinking, of course, in terms of distributions. And what I mean by expectation management is, of course, there are things we should be considering up front. There are going to be things that we learn as we go. But if you're a business owner and your business partnership 10 years into it now, and you're saying this is still messy for me, hit the reset, not like blow the business up and start over, but hit the reset in terms of how you're having conversations. Because if you're still stuck, chances are you're not having the right conversations. Or if you're stuck and you're trying to have the right conversations, you're not involving the right people into those conversations. And bringing other third parties often into those dialogues when you're stuck can be really helpful to help facilitate the conversations that maybe aren't being had or aren't being had productively. To Matt's point, especially when we have business partners that are both active and working in the business, it can be very personal, the business itself, as well as the reasons for being in business. Oftentimes, if both are very active in the business, there's some type of expected financial return for the time that they're investing, as well as hopefully the expected return on the investment down the road. And what I mean more specifically by that, business partners may think to themselves, wow, if I did this separately from this business, I could have a better value for my time, which means that resolving those conversations in a healthy way means that both people are satisfied with what that business is producing, and or both people are satisfied with what each other might also be doing outside of the business, if that's on the table, to be able to provide whatever those means are that they might be looking for. So expectation management, whether you're new or whether you're down the road, is the absolute critical part, which means that the consistency of those conversations and the depth of the conversations have to match the situation.
And Eric, just to step into that just a little bit more, I would say conflict delayed is conflict magnified.
Yeah. Yep.
And so if you're walking through something and you're delaying this conflict, delaying this conflict, well, you're still going to have the conflict until you address and embrace the conflict. And in business, you're going to have conflict. You're going to have conflict with your employees. You're going to have conflict with your customers. You're going to have conflict with your partnerships. But you need to address those conflicts in an effective way. And the expectation management, if you're already in it, then it's setting those new expectations and getting a process in place. If you're new to it, it's setting those regular cadence where you're checking in. And when it says, hey, what are the key critical things that are going on in the business, and how are you doing? And how do you feel? And is there anything that we're doing right now that upsets you about how I'm operating or what? I mean, having these conversations regularly, then a small thing stays a small thing. But not having these things and then having, 2-3 years later, and what happened was the key person in your business started another business behind your back that was in a different vertical or what have you, or pretty close, but kind of the same thing, similar but different. And now they focus all their energy on that, and they're saying, hey, look, I'm done with this. And it's because you didn't have those regular conversations along the way. And I'm sure we all have all had clients who have had business partnerships with either key people and or their existing partner who did a different business, and maybe use some of the client data to actually do that other business, right? And now you got this whole mess on your hands, and you could have solved it by addressing the conflict early on and embracing the conflict early on. So getting a habit of communication, just like you would in any other good relationship, and you'll be able to alleviate some of these catastrophic issues that are out there, and each and every one of us on this panel have seen.
I'll just jump in and say that, time can magnify those issues that maybe some didn't know were issues. Money can do this too, that as the business prospers, money reveals people.
More money, more problems.
That's it.
It wouldn't be as many attorneys if it wasn't some truth to that. So,
yeah, absolutely. So just a pause here to say that if you are just joining us live and you, as we're talking, you think of some questions that you might have and you're just holding on to it, go ahead and put it in the comments so that we can answer it for you. If you think that, this is stupid, I'm sure somebody else that's watching has the same question. So go ahead and drop it in there. Or even just comment to say hi. That's fine too. So we've hit around this topic of this next question. And I think it's pretty clear that clear communication plays a massive role in a successful business partnership. But I want to focus on the second part of the question here is how can business partners improve their communication? And I'm going to go to you, Eric, because you mentioned having those discussions and hitting a reset if you're already in a business partnership. So can you expand on that a little for me?
Yeah, so my answer is going to be self-serving, admittedly, but not in the sense that it really just points back to the work that we do for Journey. It points back to the work that needs to be done by business partners, whether they do that without a third party involved or whether they bring other third parties into the mix. But approaching role clarity with a level of thoughtfulness and thoroughness is absolutely critical. We use a role benchmark process, and what that looks like is using a structured way to really inform what are the expectations that someone has of a particular role. And when you're in a business partnership, what you're really saying is, what are the expectations that I have of the other person? What are the key accountabilities? What are the problems that this person, my business partner, needs to be able to solve for the business? And having clarity on those. Regular execution. What are the things that I expect this person, I expect my business partner to be doing on a regular basis, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually? Outputs. What does this person produce? What are they actually doing for the business that I might even be able to inspect, even if it's something, document wise or output wise that I could review. And granted, your business partners, you should still be able to hold each other accountable. And I view accountability as a very positive thing. So the more clarity you have on that role, the higher chance you can hold each other accountable and help each other to be able to perform at their best for the success of the business. And output might be who's the one that really drives the planning process, annual planning, strategic planning, whatever it might be. Who's the one that is responsible for the marketing plan, the sales plan? Who's responsible for, if there's, depending on the business type, the operations planning as an output? Who's responsible for the hiring, the firing, as it relates to different roles? All these things are potentially outputs that come out of that role, and having those conversations up front. Know-how, technical ability, as I believe it was Matt that mentioned it. I apologize, Rob, if it was you, but oftentimes we get into partnerships because we see these complementary relationships. Well, there's also this aspect where both partners don't know everything they need to know to be successful within the business. And so what expectations do you have of each other that the person's going to learn or grow into certain things that maybe they don't know? And clarifying that up front, and not just assuming that someone's going to learn X or grow into Y within the role. Doesn't mean they have to do it day one, but it means that you're both clear that over a period of whatever that time is, that person is going to be proficient enough to handle that particular area of the business if that's something that they have to be able to handle as well. And then we look at soft skills as well. People, especially when you form these business partnerships, we have this assumption that each other are bringing certain things to the table, but what we aren't necessarily peeling back the layers on, or what are the other soft skills that might be involved in them leading and running the business, especially if maybe they've never been in that role or that capacity before, that they either have to have coming in or that they need to be able to develop. And so calling out what those top soft skills or competencies are gives each other the highest chance of success to develop them as they're moving along, if they're critical for the success of the business. So just to kind of sum it all up, I mean, role clarity, of course, is a huge part of what we do, but what we believe in. And it doesn't matter if you're brand new forming a business partnership, or again, if you're 10, 15 years down the road, because the partnership's going to continue to morph into what the business needs and what the partnership needs, which means that role clarity process needs to be continuous, because the role that you're playing now in a partnership might not be the exact role that you're playing 5 or 10 years from now. And so a continuous process of updating the expectations of each other means that you're really getting ahead of what could be unhealthy conflict and having productive conflict to focus on the task at hand and what each business partner needs to be able to bring to the table.
Yeah, that aspect of accountability that you've mentioned and that you've even talked around, that sounds like such a key part of the success of a business partnership, but also on the flip side, such a benefit of having a business partnership, because you see a lot of solopreneurs talking about that lack of accountability. And so having that kind of built-in accountability and making sure that you structure it that way sounds like it would be a really beneficial thing.
As long as both people are willing to engage in it, and if both people aren't willing to engage in it, then I would say that's a sign that you shouldn't partner up. And there's different levels of that we grow into and we learn as we go through it. And if it's 10 or 15 years into a business partnership and that level of accountability that needs to be there isn't there, then that's probably the impetus to start having some deeper conversations about the partnership and the expectations of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to move this one to you, Matt. on communication. So you've mentioned clear communication playing a crucial role, but how can partners improve it? Maybe if they're starting out, or especially if they're already in a business partnership.
I think naturally, very oftentimes, as human beings, we want to point the finger at what the problem is. But what we don't ask is, how did I contribute to the problem that we currently have? And so I think a really good place to start is with you, and to ask yourself that question. Hey, how did I contribute to this current problem? Right? What could I have done differently to avoid this? Maybe I didn't give clear enough direction. Maybe there was a miscommunication. Maybe there was this. I think if you're in a really good business partnership and you've been in one, there's stuff that happens that could upset you, and you really need to evaluate, is it really them or is it me? So I try to do that with any challenge that I run into. The other thing that I like is John Gordon's got a thing called the STAR method, which is like, there's a situation, there's a task, there's an action, there's a result. It's kind of working through, what's the situation that we currently have? What tasks do we need to do to really understand what that situation is and how we can improve it? What are the action steps we need to take? And then how do we measure those action steps? What's the result on the tail end of that? I would say, how did I contribute to the problem that I currently see? And how could I have done better? I think that's the first thing. So look inward before you look outward, because naturally we look outward. And then some sort of process as it relates to regular cadence. You don't want to have a meeting, but you want to have a check-in to make sure that something doesn't get messed up and long-term. And I think that check-in is valuable because, as I mentioned before, that those conflicts, those little things that bother you end up becoming big things later on. So let's try to handle them up front.
Yeah. You can't have clear communication if you're not creating space for it. So that's really good. All right, Rob. So I'm going to pose that one to you as well. How can business partners improve their communication?
In the same way that, having structure to the business, to the partnership is critical. Having structure to the communication can go a very long way. There are different tools to accomplish this, but having a meeting agenda, that if you're going to bother to have a meeting, there ought to be a meeting agenda that's circulated in advance of the meeting, not at the meeting. And that, there's somebody who's taking notes or making minutes. With the AI tools that are available, there's not to give any particular product a plug, but there's Plaud or Plaud, Plaud. It's a little credit card looking device. You just press record and it takes all your notes. It records everything you say, and then AI generates a summary that can include major talking points. You can even see things that you maybe didn't discuss, didn't talk about, and give you those suggestions. A tool I've used over the years, just a quick go-to. It's not legal advice at all, but TAO, TAO. So talking points, action, steps, outcomes, so that the meeting is productive, that there's something that comes out of it, that there's a clear expectation of what the outcomes are and next steps, so that it's making highest and best use of everyone's time. I'm sure everyone in the room, has probably been to a meeting that they wish they hadn't been to, or thought, well, that maybe wasn't the very best use of time. And so to have that, thriving partnership, just, being respectful of everyone's time by being prepared in advance of the meeting, for that meeting, and then having structure, like even, when does it end? So I think lawyers learned that one pretty early on with the, SAN going, how you measure the time, but just, keeping track of it, making sure you're following that structure. Everybody's playing by the rules. It can go a very long way.
Yeah. Structure is definitely critical. And like you said, we've all been in meetings that we didn't want to be in. So the structure aspect that is absolutely a great addition there.
I have something here, Jordan.
Yeah.
On the structure side, so it has to fit context, but I can, if anybody's watching this now or watching the recording, I can save you even hiring us for our service. So the hidden need that often business partners are coming to us for is exactly what we're talking about now. So the communication aspect stems into every other aspect that we've talked about so far. And so normally we're hearing about some other problem or some other need, and the first thing that we're coming in to do is we're actually building the system for communication within the ownership structure. So if it's business partners, and then within the leadership structure. Once we have that vehicle built, we can move everything else through the business. So I just gave away our secret. So what I mean by that is it's actually we lean towards creating a structure that allows over communication. I view it like an insurance policy. Is if I build the structure out, you're not going to use it as effective as it might need to be used every single touch that you have within the communication structure. But when you need it, it's already there. You've already built the muscle, you've already built the habit, and it serves the exact purpose that's necessary for it. An example, so weekly alignment meeting. I will plug two different systems that can support you in this. They help with the agenda. They'll come preset with some agendas as well. One is 90.io. The other one is Bloom Growth. Both of those systems, and there's others out there, will help you run that weekly 90-minute meeting. You can adjust it to 60. You can fool yourselves thinking you can get it done in 60. You're still probably going to take 90. But you can run a weekly meeting. And again, depending on the type of business, the type of partnership, passive, active, those are going to change your context. But if you're active business partners working within the business, you need the weekly meeting because there are conversations you should be having that you're not having. If that weekly meeting then includes other team members, you still are going to need some space outside of that for just the two of you. I work primarily remote in the work that I do. I see the value in still meeting with Mark and I, having dinners together in person and spending time together in person at times as well. Daily huddle. This is where most people roll their eyes. They say, there's no way I'm going to touch base on a daily basis. If you're two active business owners within the business, setting up 4 days a week, 15 minutes per day in a daily huddle, you're not going to hit every one of them. You're going to miss them. Things are going to happen. Things are going to come up. So set them for 4 days a week and 15 minutes per day. And it's a real quick, hey, how'd yesterday go? What's today looking like, or tomorrow, depending on the time of day you have your daily huddle. And then any bottlenecks, anything getting in the way. Real quick. And every once in a while, that'll create a deeper dialogue. And sometimes it's a 5-minute conversation and you're done at that point. But if you have the weekly alignment, if you have the separate time that's more informal set up, and you have the daily huddle structure set up, you have the components that are necessary, and then quarterly planning session, annual planning session. So if you put all those in place, you have the structure you need for communication to be effective. And then you just have to do everything we've talked about for the first half of this dialogue, which is have the right conversations and level set expectations as you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic structure. And this is a personal thing, but I know that from watching that structure happen and from participating in it, it really does create that necessary alignment and clarity. So for anyone watching, definitely, try to set up that structure, if not that exact one, something similar. It really, really makes a difference.
Well, and also, and one more thing, and to Eric's point, I think it's also prioritization, right? Because there's that communication, having it as regularly as you have it, may get lost with, oh well, I can skip it, and then you skip 2, and then you skip a bunch, and then next thing you know, you really push it to the side, and you're doing all these other things. And I think, like any successful marriage, there has to be great communication, and putting that at the very top of your priority list is really important for you to be successful long term. So.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic addition, Matt. Thank you. I'm actually going to pose the next question to you since I have you on screen. We'll be mindful of time, so this will be the last one I think that we'll ask. But how do business partners balance decision-making authority and also ensure fairness and efficiency?
That's a good question. How do you balance it? Well, depends on how many business partners you got.
Mm.
And then,
Yeah.
then to Rob's point, depends on you if you have created a decision structure with tie breaks or not. Because if it's a 50-50 partnership, then you have to figure out together, lock yourself in a room or something. I'm sure maybe Rob has a better idea, but that, yeah, but I would just say to ensure fairness means that you're working and you're in partnership with a really fair person. And
Yeah.
it really all folds back to that for me is that it starts with the person that they are, and if you have a person who is unfair or treats people unfairly, then they will eventually, or people around you unfairly, they'll eventually treat you unfairly. And so having a good process in place, having a good decision protocol in place. Maybe you are two owners, but you have a key person, and that key person's your decision maker who you feel like can help you to get through certain decisions. Then bring that person into the decision if they've been with you for a while or whatnot. But having some sort of clarity on how you're going to make those decisions before the tough decisions happen is kind of going all the way back to what we talked about before, which is really expectations and all of that. So, but I think that's all I got for that one.
Yeah, I think that callback to seeing how they treat other people around you that's fantastic advice there, Matt. I'm going to pose this one to you, Rob, because like Matt said, I think you'll have some ideas on this. How can business partners balance decision-making authority while ensuring fairness and efficiency?
Making sure that there is it's clear on who the decision makers are. The cases that are litigated cases, a lot of times you have people that think they're a decision maker, but actually they're just really more of a silent investor role, or that's what the decision maker believes. So if there are governing documents, looking at those and having a clear understanding of, do you actually have a vote, and do you have a say in how those decisions are made? Also, just looking at people's track record, if they've been in business before, how'd that go? What are their former business partners, or if they're still in business, what are their references? What do they say about them and how they conduct themselves and make decisions? But making sure that there's a process, a written process for how those the big decisions are made, and that it is followed. Because the cases where there are actually cases is when it's not, because someone wants to take a left and the other person wants to go right, or some want to keep going straight. That's where things can be a lot of friction. The issues can be presented is when decisions are made that violate what the terms of the agreement are about how decisions are made, and that there's a clear record, of when decisions were made, by whom. If it requires a majority vote, what does this mean? Does this mean a majority of all the owners, or does it mean a majority of the persons present at the meeting? What does that mean exactly? And just having clarity on that before the big decisions are made. And that if there's not clarity, or if there are issues, call Eric immediately. He did not ask me to say that, but just getting to the heart of it. Opening up the lines for there to be the communication. Communication solves a lot of problems.
Yeah, Rob, I think that kind of there can be a bit of expansion there on some of the things that we've hit on with if you're already in a business partnership and maybe things weren't that way, they haven't always been fair or they haven't always been efficient. Is there any way that you could think of that they could improve, any way that they could improve upon that?
Yeah, build on the good of what's there, so if there is structure, just building on the good of what's already there, but being open for there to be improvement, so stayed at a hotel recently, did see carpet on the walls in one of the rooms. I don't know. It seems outdated. Just saying. Sometimes there is a better way of doing things, and sometimes the newer way of doing it is better. So, just having a willingness, an open-mindedness to improve.
That's really good. That's really good. So Eric, I'll go to you with this one after Rob plugged calling you. So
Yeah.
how can business partners balance decision-making authority while ensuring fairness and efficiency?
Yep. Yeah. So I'll come at it from another perspective, and I'm thinking about the business owners, the business partners that are primarily active in the business together, regardless of what share percentage, regardless of who has ultimate say, based off of that voting rights, if you will, and maybe anything else that might even be in play from a legal structure and from a decision-making standpoint. And that's the ability to collaborate. It's an overused word. Most people don't know how to do it. And so I think one of the things that can be done in a very practical way is for at least one of the business partners willingly to learn what collaboration is and how to play an active role in that and what it actually means. So that's a very practical thing versus just using it as a buzzword. The other aspect of that would be understanding power and influence. And from a practical standpoint, understanding how that power and influence is being used. And chances are, if there's a business partnership, kind of broad general statement, I have no evidence of this other than the work that we do. One person's going to be more interested in learning this than the other one. But the reality is, by learning that, you can be effective to serve or support the business partnership and support each other, because both of the business partners might be trying to influence or have power in certain areas, and it might be happening in unhealthy ways. And so being able to do that in a healthier way for decision making is going to lead to better success. The other thing is, as business partners, is to realize that foundation of trust. That's critical. If it's lost, figure out what the steps are to regain it for better decision making, because the decisions that you're not making or making in the meantime might not be good decisions, because you two are more worried about the challenges or the issues you might be having with each other or as a group of business partners than the real decisions that need to be made for the business. So try to reestablish trust based off the task at hand. And then the other thing would be thinking long-term from a decision-making standpoint is how as business partners are you going through your decision-making process in a way that's going to lead to the success of the business, not just for maybe the immediate emotions, feelings, or outcomes that you might be looking for. The last thing I'll bring up in this is we do have, of course, plug, but shameless, but not really. We do have an assessment that we use as part of our stack, which is called Builder Protector. It has to do with confidence to caution approach within a business. And it really creates good dialogues between business partnerships as well as their teams if they're engaged in the process. I'm going to give you an example. One of them, one of the areas it points to is this area of asking permission. And do business partners feel like they have to ask permission of each other to make decisions and move things forward or not? And it's not to say one is better than the other, but it's to get an understanding of where the business partners or the teams at related to that, because you might find that one business partner really feels like they have to ask permission regardless of legal structuring, and one business partner doesn't feel like they have to. And that in and of itself might be creating the friction that's underlying that you haven't been able to label. And it's just a dialogue to say, hey, like, here are the types of things we should be talking about and asking permission of each other for, and here are the types of things that don't matter. So leave your baggage at the door. This is how we're actually going to make decisions going forward now that we've had this open dialogue. So using third-party tools can really be helpful to create the conversations around things like decision making that maybe you didn't even know you should be having or could be having. Oh,
You're muted, Jordan. Yeah.
Classic. So much good stuff here. I'm sure that anyone watching, you've got a lot to think of, but I'm going to wrap us up here. So I'll start with you, Eric. How can people contact you?
Yep. You can find me on LinkedIn fairly easily. Just look me up there. Also, Eric, ERIC at journey-alliance.com.
Gotcha. And Matt, how about you? How can people contact you?
Yeah. You can find us on our website. It's www.mchini-wealth. McKinney's MICHINI. It's on the screen here. You can also call our office. That's 813-371-6935. Love to hear from you and see how we can support you.
Gotcha. And Rob, how about you? How can people contact you?
Yeah, best way is email. It's rob@attorneywalton.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for those who have joined us live or watching the recording. And that's all for us.
Thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
Jordan.
Thanks.